안녕하십니까. 저는 시바사키 히데코예요. 만나서
Hello, I'm Hideko Shibasaki. I'd like to talk about Japan's young generation and nuclear weapons and atomic bombings. Japan was once developing nuclear bombs during the war, and the central figure was Dr. Yoshio Nishina, the father of atomic physics in Japan. However, upon witnessing the devastation of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945, he left those two words. One is we must not conduct research for the purpose of war, and the other is that scientists must have social responsibility. After the war, these words were passed on by Professor Tomonaga, Yukawa, and Sakata. They've consistently called for the abolition of nuclear weapons. So Dr. Nishina's words form the central concept of their work. Now, is this spirit being passed on to the younger generation in Japan who will be responsible for the future of science and technology? That's what I set out to find out in this survey. Here I asked young people studying engineering at Japanese universities to evaluate the following 5 items on a 6-point scale: strongly agree, agree, somewhat agree, disagree, disagree, and completely disagree. The sample size was 285, which was 14.2% of the total number of Japanese students at that university. Total was 2001. And so statistically, the number is considered to be sufficient to reflect the population. First question, we asked whether they agree. It was a right decision to attack by atomic bombing in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Number 2, nuclear weapons are necessary. Number 3, there's a possibility that nuclear weapons will be used in the future. Number 4, in the future, nuclear weapons can be eliminated. Number 5, nuclear weapons are effective in deterring war. Many people in the United States still believe that the atomic bombings were unfortunate, but an effective way to end the war quickly. In an 2015 survey, 46% of the respondents agreed that the bombings were the right decision. Well, what about the youths in Japan? So that's what I sought to identify in question number 1. One of the reasons against nuclear abolition is the idea that nuclear weapons have a deterrent effect on nuclear war. ICAN, International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, takes the position that nuclear weapons are not a necessary evil, but an absolute evil. But what are the views of youths in Japan, where it's assumed to be protected under the US nuclear umbrella? This is the reason why I asked questions 2 and 5. The responses of completely agree to somewhat agree were classified as agree, and somewhat disagree to strongly disagree were classified as disagree, and analysis was made. In order to examine, well, 39% agree with atomic bombing. Those who feel nuclear weapons are necessary, 29%. There's a possibility of using nuclear weapons. Well, people are quite pessimistic. 83% think there's that possibility. It's possible to abolish nuclear weapons. Very pessimistic here. And nuclear weapons have a deterrent effect, about half and half. So that was the result that we had. So are these numbers high or low? Well, let's compare with the international students who have come to Japan and college students in the US. So we surveyed 523 exchange students, international students in Japan. And we also surveyed 238 American students. We did online and face-to-face surveys. all of the American students are those taking Japanese language courses. So please focus on the red circles. It was a right decision to attack by atomic bombing. Amongst the Japanese students, you had the highest number who agreed. Nuclear weapons are necessary. Concerning that necessity, Japanese students had the highest ratio of agree. And nuclear weapons can be eliminated in the future. The Japanese are the most pessimistic. And nuclear weapons are effective in deterring war. Japanese tended to agree the most. So those were the numbers that we observed. So I was more than a little bit surprised by the results of the Japanese students. What is it that is shaping these attitudes? So we compared their peace study experience and the knowledge with international and American students. So this is Japanese. These are international students. We broke them down to Asian and non-Asian because we anticipated that numbers would be quite different depending on where they originally come from, and that was true. And on the far right, you see the Americans. So they've seen photos and videos of aftermath of A bombings. Those who said yes, non-Asian international students and American students, quite high, higher than Japanese students. They visited the museum in Hiroshima or Nagasaki. Well, if you're living in the US, difficult to visit, but the non-Asian international students have visited more than the Japanese students. So quite a low percentage of Japanese have visited. They've heard the experience of A-bomb survivors, maybe directly or through YouTube. So American students had the highest number. This might be surprising to you. And I also had the impression that there are so many lectures on this topic held at Japanese university or American universities. And this shows the number, those who answered correctly, number of nuclear weapons in the world. So the non-Asian international students had the highest ratio of correct answer. Number of atomic death, again, highest for non-Asian international students. The date the bombs were dropped in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, highest for the non-Asian international students. Amongst the Japanese students, only half were able to answer accurately. So that is the actual situation. The sample number is different, so you can't generalize. But the non-Asian, so North American, European, and Oceanian students, well, they probably came to Japan because they were interested in Japan. So it's natural that they have a lot of knowledge about Japan in general. Amongst the international students, the Asian students you see have much lower numbers. Actually, 70% of this population are Chinese international students, and their numbers are quite low uniformly. Those that have the experience of hearing from Hibakusha, only 3.3% amongst the Chinese. But the more important than that, the low level of knowledge among Japanese students suggests that there is a lot of room for improvement in peace education for Japanese students. So I asked the following additional questions to the Japanese students. I don't have time, so I'll skip over this. Just one point here. I added this question. When the A-bomb was dropped, who was the American president? So I asked that the president. The correct answer is Truman, but only 14.7% answered correctly. Some of the wrong answers included Roosevelt, Eisenhower. Well, that's understandable. But Kennedy, Bush, Clinton, and even MacArthur. 5 people said MacArthur. Even more surprising, Khrushchev. 3 people said Khrushchev. So this suggests that the history education in Japan is not sufficient, but moving away from the A-bomb, like I asked this kind of question. So how many Japanese died in World War II? Approximately 2 million. And how many were killed by the Japanese? About 20 million, it is said. So overwhelmingly, B is larger than A. But the only 5% were able to answer correctly. 95% believed A was bigger than B. That is reality. So it's often been pointed out that the Japanese youth are ignorant of contemporary Asian history. I don't think it's their fault. It's the fault of the teachers, the educators. Setsuko Thorough of ICANN said that only by admitting that Japan is a perpetrator of war can the people of Asia open their hearts to us. In fact, an Indonesian student in my class said, the number of people that Japan killed in my country is greater than the number of people that died in the atomic bombing. So I think it's wrong to talk only about the damage caused by the atomic bomb. Whether it be history or nuclear weapons, I think the important thing is to first know about it. So here I introduce a class that I gave. So it's for engineering students. So I designed a class to using videos and movies from the discovery of radium to the atomic bombings. I encouraged them to think about the life of the scientists. I also used the Russell-Einstein Manifesto and the Tomonaga's fallacy of war deterrence by nuclear weapons, but I especially focused on the lives of the Hibakusha, the A-bomb survivors. And there was always a big change in the students' perceptions before and after the class. Opposition increases overwhelmingly to atomic bombings and the deterrent effect of nuclear weapons. As one Chinese student put it, I thought China was the only victim, but Japan had such a hard time too. War is evil. We should never have war. A student from Mexico said, until I took this class, I thought that the war ended with the atomic bombing, so I felt sorry for them, but I felt it couldn't be helped. But now my thinking has changed. My idea that the atomic bombing was right is 100% gone. Another Chinese student wrote, natural disasters are unavoidable, but wars are fought by people, so we can stop them if we want to. That's why nuclear weapons and war can be stopped. Unfortunately, I did not have the opportunity to conduct this kind of a class to the Japanese students, but we invited an astrophysicist and a member of the Committee of Seven to Appeal for World Peace, Dr. Satoru Ikeuchi, who gave a lecture titled Social Responsibility of Scientists and Engineers. This is the poster that we made. I think it's a great design. And in his lecture, Dr. Ikeuchi said that we need to have a philosophy that will determine the direction of our lives. What I feel is that the few years after reaching age of 18 are the time to build the foundation of one's thinking and search for one's way of life. The students at the engineering university ordinarily learn how to develop technology, but they don't have many opportunities to learn what to develop for. Many students commented that they were greatly inspired by Dr. Ikeuchi's lecture. This is the kind of education that is necessary. Einstein said, education is what is left after you have forgotten everything you learned in school. I think education is about planting the seeds of peace. The students may forget everything they learned in class by the time they eat lunch. That's okay. If you sow the seeds, someday they will remember. Peace education is not some grand endeavor. It's just about planting the seeds of peace in each and every student. There is no other way, and there is no better way. With my many years of experience dealing with exchange students, I feel it is the duty of the Japanese language teacher from a country that has experienced nuclear weapons to talk about the futility and horror of nuclear weapons. Because if you're born and you live in a country where nuclear weapons are deemed to be a necessary evil to deter nuclear war, you will never have the opportunity to learn ICANN's argument that nuclear weapons are an absolute evil. These are the words inscribed on the side of Gandhi's grave, the 7 social sins. And here are the famous words of Gandhi. What is, well, science without humanity? What is the use of science without humanity? Those are the famous words of Gandhi. Science needs character. I hope that the scientists and engineers of the future will take these words to heart. Thank you for your kind attention.
柴崎さん、ありがとうございました。